Welcome to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. This is the Manchester Arena bombing on trial series. On the 22nd of May, 2017, Salman Abedi detonated a bomb in the foyer of the Manchester Arena at the end of an Ariana Grande concert, killing 22 people and injuring hundreds more. A conspiracy theory claiming that this bombing was hoaxed and everyone involved was a crisis actor soon became a dominant narrative in the conspirasphere. One of the main proponents of this theory is Richard D. Hall. Over the course of this series, we will be examining the claims made by Richard D. Hall, as told in his book and documentary, Night of the Bang. Please be aware, this series will be examining a deadly bombing, and we will be discussing details of death and injury. Listener discretion is advised. This is part 4.
Right. Okay. So Kelly Brewster, she went to the concert with her sister Claire Booth and her niece Holly Booth, and sadly she died shielding Holly from the blast.
Man.
Now, the interesting thing is that according to Richard's investigation, she's also in Florida because she also in the past has gone to Dolphin Cove. Like the place that the previous person had gone to. So that's a connection. Now he doubles down that basically she was apparently had a relationship, a partner called Ian Winslow, and Ian had a daughter who, according to the MSM, like really got on well with Kelly. But Richard doubts this. He says that basically it kind of sounds fake, and the reason he thinks that this is fake is because in the media, Ian said it was so tragic that Kelly died because we were trying for a baby. And Richard thinks that that's furnishing. He's extrapolist, he's stuff that basically he's there to pull on your heartstrings. But Kelly has no ties, and she's now living the high life in Florida. Nell Jones was 14. She was with a friend, Freya Lewis, and they both went to the same school. In fact, quite a few kids from this school actually went to this concert. Not together, they just happened to go there. Freya was actually helped by a couple, Phil and Kim Dick, and they were there to pick up their daughter and granddaughter. Phil Dick also basically in various interviews has described seeing the legs of the suicide bomber. Richard basically says that she's an apprentice child, but he doesn't actually give any details of what she's an apprentice of or where she's gone. But he thinks that basically in certain stories, Nell was apparently on crutches. And her friend Freya in an interview said, I remember walking along with Nell and we were holding hands, or had arms linked. And Richard says that there's no way you can do both. And that also interviews with Nell's brothers, they don't seem very sad that their sister's dead. And he also questions why that couple, Phil and Kim Dick, were helping this dying child and not looking for their own children and granddaughters. Now, Genevieve Lewis has examined the interviews, and she says that Kim Dick, who's the woman who held the girl as she died, is lying. Because she said, we'd had a drink in the bar. We'd been around Manchester whilst we waited for the girls. And did you spot it? She said, we. She didn't say I. She said we. And obviously, according to Genevieve Lewis, this is indicative of lying. She also said, when she was describing Nell, her long hair was all burnt. And Genevieve Lewis says, well, that's a lie, because why would you say her long hair? Long's unnecessary. According to Genevieve Lewis, this is her exact point, which anyone that's ever listened to me talking might find rather amusing. This goes against the brain's law of economy, where the fewest words are best.
Oh, you're succinct as they come, my sweet. Don't you worry. No, seriously, it's one of the things I love about this podcast. You guys are kind of succinct. A lot of podcasts waffle along. Man, you just spit fire, which I love.
Oh, thank you.
So keep spitting.
They gave us bandages, which we wound around her arm to keep the blood because her blood was just oozing. And that's obviously incorrect pronouns. And GL thinks that errors in chronology of remembering it show that Kim is lying. Now, she says, memory due to experience is easy to recall in chronological order because of the experience. A subject can recite the day backwards and forwards. Due to the trauma of a bomb blast, a person's adrenaline will be on high alert and their senses sharpened and heightened, recalling in vivid detail everything that happened. Going out of chronological order indicates deception. So what she's saying is that basically if you have a traumatic incident, it is burned into your memory and you will always recall it in chronological order. Is that true? We'll find out later. Eileen MacLeod was only 14. She went to the concert from, she lived in a very, very sort of distant island in Scotland. And she went there with her friend Laura McIntyre, who's 15. Now, her friend was very, very badly burnt and broke her leg. And she was pictured in hospital several times. Now, according to her parents, Eileen loved playing music and she loved the bagpipes. And so Richard speculates that basically she's probably been relocated somewhere on a music scholarship. But here's an interesting point. Both he and UK Critical Thinker tried to find Eileen MacLeod's death certificate. Why they particularly went for this girl, but they looked on the register in Scotland and they just could not find her death certificate. And so they contend that this death certificate does not exist and speculate that that might be due to the fact that she's not dead, essentially.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, they couldn't find that.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is unusual. Olivia Campbell Hardy, who's 15, she went to the concert with her friend Adam Lawler, and he actually got a piece of shrapnel through the cheek. Now, there's a photograph that exists of them in Manchester with no wounds, reportedly a few hours before the concert started. And Adam apparently called his mum at 10:40 at night, just after the bomb, and then again at 4:15 a.m. to confirm that he was all right, but that Olivia was dead. But Richard doesn't think that they were there in the evening. Richard thinks that due to statements that Adams made, that he got into a fight with some lads on an earlier occasion, and he'd been glassed, and that's where he's got these facial wounds. And he thinks that Olivia is teaching dance abroad, probably in the Canary Islands, because her mum and her stepdad actually moved to Lanzarote after the incident. So he thinks that she's gone out there. But Richard also says that he's watched the mother crying on the news, and he thinks that it's a total put-on, that she's not really upset, that she's pretending, she's acting being upset. Now, what's interesting as well is that Olivia's Facebook page disappeared, and then a new one started up on Facebook very, very shortly afterwards, which no one could explain because obviously she was supposedly dead. And Richard thinks that basically Olivia did this to try and alert the public that she was still alive, but then sort of got cold feet or something like that. Now, Richard did actually get an email from somebody that, this is an interesting read because it's somebody who purports to be a fan of Richard, but he also claims to be Olivia's boyfriend, Lewis. And he's saying that, Richard, I really respect you. I think you're very, very good. I like your previous work. Olivia's dead. Trust me. But Richard does not believe this to be a real email. And he says that actually some of the language that's used in it indicates that this person is American. And so he suspects that this is a hoax. Now, Genevieve Lewis also thinks that Adam Lawler, who got the bolt through his face, is a liar because he says, honestly, it's like that kind of funny where she don't care how people see her. She's having a laugh. Honestly, it's those people who have the best time. Honest, they'll leave the biggest impression on you. And Genevieve Lewis says that he doesn't really think that they knew each other very well and that the use of honest, the repetitive, is him trying to sell it to you and that this is actually an indication that he's lying. Megan Hurley was 15. She attended the concert with her brother Bradley, who was 20, and he was injured in the attack and she sadly died. Richard's investigation says that Megan, 15, fits the apprentice child category, but he doesn't actually give any more indication of that. He just says that she's abroad in an unknown country. Now, Richard also received an email saying, I don't know if this woman ever existed because I cannot find any mention of her at all in the Liverpool Echo. This woman apparently came from Liverpool, died. Usually this paper is very, very sort of hot on sort of publicizing the funeral, details and stuff like that. According to Richard's investigation, this is in his book, there was no mention of it at all. So again, strange if true. John Atkinson was 28 and he was injured in the legs and he dragged himself across the floor, leaving a large blood trail. And then he sadly went into cardiac arrest later in hospital and died. He went to the concert with his friend Gemma O'Donnell. Now, according to Richard's investigation, it was reported that John was found in the foyer but died in hospital from a cardiac arrest. And he was one of the three that died in hospital. So he thinks this is actually indicative that the narrative was changed. And he speculates that this bloke actually died from a heart attack before the event because he was a quite portly fellow who'd recently tried to lose some weight. And so that could be it. But he also says that he's got no ties and so he's probably abroad.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So we don't really know with that one. Martin Hett was 29 and he attended the concert with his friend Stuart Aspinall, and he left his seat about 10:20, went to the foyer and sadly died. And Richard thinks that it's very strange that he left at 10:20. He says if you wanted to get a drink or use the toilet, you wouldn't need to go into the foyer. You'd go into the areas where Nick Bickerstaff was. So why did he go to the foyer? And Richard's actually been to Stuart's home 3 times. Stuart Aspinall was his partner, but he wasn't in. Hett was actually going to go on holiday to America, and Richard thinks that basically because he's got no ties, he's actually already gone to America. And he accuses the parents of lacking emotion in interviews. Genevieve Lewis says that Martin's mother did not get on well with her daughter based on not using her name in this paragraph. He was supposed to go to America on the Wednesday, and 2 days later, I thought he's home packing. Then my 19-year-old daughter woke me up and said, "Mum, there's been an incident." And from that, Genevieve Lewis deducts the fact that Martin Hett's mother hates her 19-year-old daughter.
Fucking hell. Oh, man, there's a long list of dead and a long list of reasons to be fucking annoyed. So I'm just going to let a little valve out and be like, that was annoying. Let's keep going. Fuck. It's hard.
Georgina Callender, who was 18, she was badly hurt in the foyer when her mother Leslie arrived to collect her, and she also died in hospital. But according to Richard's investigation, she thinks that basically, because she was just about to go to university, he thinks that she was an apprentice child. Now, also, here's an interesting aside. She'd previously played for Bolton Wanderers, and Martin Hibbert, who was in a wheelchair, he used to live in Bolton, and he's a football agent.
Well, okay.
Is there a connection? Well, the connection's Bolton. But
man, I needed that. I needed a joke because I'm dying here, man. I'm dying.
Right, here we go.
It's been a grim list. And I want to say to listeners, good on you for hanging out with that. And if you are feeling emotions right now after just hearing a fucking string of people just dead, good on you. Because that was hard. It was a lot to take in. And bless your hearts, because we're in this journey with you guys together. That was hard. Let's keep going. But yeah, I would love a redemption arc.
Trust me, let's stick with it. It's going to be rewarding. I'm telling you now.
He put all this forward as the evidence. So I think we need to drive home how hard this is.
Yeah.
This is a very serious thing, and we need to go through this all together.
It is, but it's hard because hearing about relentless death is hard. So I just want to give a bit of love to those who are listening, because it's a bit of hard listen. Anyone who's empaths or anyone who feels this sort of pain, bless your hearts, but stick in there, man. We're going to get there because there's an overarching moral of the story, I'm sure, and I'm waiting for it. I'm keen.
So he's now moved on to the injured. So basically the injured, Ruth Morell, who's a lady that got the bolt through her leg. Richard doesn't think that it is possible for somebody with a bolt through a leg to walk. So he thinks that she's clearly lying. Lisa Roussos, who was the mother of Safi Roussos, who's in a coma, she was at the funeral, but with no visible injuries, according to Richard. And he also thinks it's strange that they abandoned their chip shop business home. So he thinks that's suspicious. Adam Lawler, who got the bolt through his face and has a tracheostomy scar, Richard thinks that basically that's not convincing. He thinks that he was glassed at some point. Robbie Potter, lost his finger, or his finger was supposedly hanging by a thread of skin, but he's pictured in the hospital 12 weeks later using his fully healed hand, which she doesn't think that's possible. Hannah Moan has got a missing finger, and Richard says that basically her house has got lots of hedges. Does this indicate that she whipped it off accidentally, cutting the hedge?
Oh, fuck.
He also says that there's no blood visible on the video footage. So her index finger's missing, and on her middle finger, there's a tiny little square scab on it. And he doesn't know what this is. He thinks that this is really, really strange. Lisa Bridget supposedly lost her middle finger, but Richard thinks that actually what she's doing is just folding her middle finger onto her palm so that it looks like she's got a middle finger. And he says that some injuries are genuine, but from prior to the blast, and some are fake, and this is fake. She's just walking around with her middle finger tucked.
They're trained to do that by the production company, I guess. Yeah.
Well, who knows? But that's what she's doing. Evie Senior. She was pictured with torn jeans being helped by two policewomen. She's the blonde girl that's being sort of helped along like that in a quite famous picture. Richard points out that it says there's absolutely no evidence of injury. But he also points out that Evie took dance classes at AKA Dance Studios in Bradford. And the owner of the studios also owns a casting agency.
There's always that thing of that these people are somehow involved in acting, because every now and then someone at some point was an actor, or someone at some point was an extra, or someone at some point. I'm a podcaster. If I'm involved in a fucking emergency, am I now a fucking crisis actor?
Probably, yeah, potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It's silly.
But GL thinks that Amelia Senior, who's 12, who's the sister of Eve, is actually lying in TV interviews, because she's describing what happened before this photo was taken. She said, we ended up leaving a bit early because, like everyone, had gone off stage because it was just like the ending bit. And she says that it's the wrong pronoun and the repeated use of cause, and the over-explaining shows that this 12-year-old kid is lying. And then she says, and I thought they were behind us, behind me. And Genevieve Lewis reiterates that pronouns are instinctive and intuitive. We use them thousands of times a day, every day. They are not pre-thought. They are always 100% reliable, even in young children. Evie Mills was 14, and she was there with a friend, Millie Mitchell, who was in a wheelchair for a time. But she was pictured outside the arena, once sat against the wall with a blanket over her and a dad comforting her, and she's on her phone. And the second, she's on a stretcher with the paramedic next to her. And Richard thinks that these pictures are fake because she's supposedly got a broken wrist and a bolt actually sort of hit the artery in her wrist as well. And she's also supposed to have got a fractured skull. But Richard says that basically she's there texting on her phone. So this is obviously not true. Richard also says it's strange that in interviews, the girls don't mention each other. And there was confusion about whose dad was supposed to be there to collect them. But he thinks that basically they didn't know each other and they must have met when they were both recruited at the morning event. So that's why they don't seem to know each other at all. Martin and Eve Hibbett. Martin was shielding his daughter, Eve. She had brain damage and Martin was paralyzed from the waist down. But Richard thinks that obviously Martin was injured in back surgery. And he wonders why Martin's gone to such huge lengths to try and keep his daughter out of the public eye. Richard, ironically, can't see why Martin might want to sort of, protect his daughter from that. But from the book, I found out where Eve and her mother live. In August 2019, I decided to visit them. Eve's mother's car was on the drive, and there were windows wide open, indicating that they were home. I knocked 3 or 4 times, but nobody answered. I left a camera running, and after a few hours, I returned. While I was away, 3 people came out of the house. Sarah Gilbard, which is the mum, a carer, and a girl in a wheelchair. They helped the girl from the wheelchair into the back seat of the car, then put the wheelchair in the boot and drove off. My camera was not close enough to see her injuries, nor make definite identification. But from the evidence, I do suspect Eve Hibbett is in a wheelchair. This was quite frustrating. What is the reason why Eve is being kept so low profile? Why does Sarah Gilbard seemingly not associate herself with the Manchester bombing crowd? That's from Richard's book. Amy Barlow is 12. She was filmed running from the venue by Zach Bruce and Annual Ewell. who was a t-shirt seller, and she sits down outside, and then all of a sudden blood starts pumping through her leg. And Richard says, it's my opinion, based on the evidence, that she was fitted with a device to allow fake blood to appear when activated. And she was helped by Andrew Ewell, who used t-shirts that he was selling to stem the bleeding. And UK Critical Thinker says, so this bloke was selling bootleg t-shirts. Well, that's how they've managed to blackmail him into going along with the plot. And Richard says the injuries are unlikely to be real because bleeding cannot happen that way that we see in the video. Both legs would not suddenly start to bleed profusely after running a distance of over 100 yards. And the final injured person is Lisa Bridget, who lost a finger in the bomb. And there's a picture of her empty shoe with a bloody bolt inside it that was taken at the site. Richard tracked her down to the place where she sells speedboats, and he tried to secretly film her because he doesn't think that she lost a finger. So he had a hidden lapel camera, and he tried to pretend that he was buying a speedboat in an attempt to get her to come out, or jet ski, I think it was, to get her to come out so he could catch her out having a finger, basically. But also Genevieve Lewis says that she's lying. It says, I was about 5 to 6 meters away from the blast. So as I say, I shielded myself. And apparently this indicates remembering a previous statement, not experience of a memory. She previously said, I tried to shield myself. And so this is what Genevieve Lewis says. Genevieve Lewis also says that she must be lying about having a bolt go through her face because there is no scar on her face. And this is the final bit before we start the debunk. So I appreciate it's been a long one. So thank you, everybody, especially you, Joel. This is a recent interview that Richard did in a Truth publication. He doesn't name which one it is. He did this interview, and basically this Truth publication, which I suspect to be The Light, but I don't know, turned around and said, we've spoken to our lawyers and we're not touching that with a fucking plastic fishing rod. You can bollocks, we're not printing it. So this is an indication that some of this might be incendiary. Who knows? But this was supposed to be published and was unpublished due to legal reasons, but it came out in August. Richard published it himself on his own website. And Richard says, I'll start by mentioning the public inquiry, which I've studied in some depth. There are approximately 1,300 hours of video testimony. If you watched 8 hours a day, it would take over 5 months to watch it all. So I watched most of it at 3 times speed. The inquiry also produced 4,100 PDF documents, and I've assessed every single one of them. Throughout the inquiry, it gets repeated over and over again. We're not going to show any image of injury or death. They often start the interviews or presentations with that excuse. The reasoning is they don't want to offend or upset the families. So you have this completely sanitized inquiry which doesn't actually provide any non-verbal evidence to show what actually happened. They should have demonstrated to the public what happened, and they've done anything but that. They also censored what people can say because it might upset people. The whole inquiry proceeded along those lines, even to the point that you had a police officer describing what's going on in the CCTV images, talking through them, but without showing the image that he's talking about. So he's giving a running commentary of a blank screen, and we're expected to believe what is happening. If you remove the witness testimony from the public inquiry, you are left with nothing. This is true. This is absolutely true. Many people have also complained about this, that basically, like, for some reason, the inquiries, for want of a better explanation, there's a certain degree of trust me, bro, coming from the authorities on this one. And while it's not true that they've not shown any images, that is certainly true that they're basically said, we're not going to show any images of death, we're not going to show any bodies. You have to take our word on this. Witness testimony is all we have to go on to decide what happened in Manchester. This is why I employed a statement analyst to look at the first-hand witness statements. The conclusion of the analyst was that the majority of the first-hand witnesses were being deceptive in their account of what happened, and the remainder were unreliable or unconclusive. In my opinion, having considered a massive amount of evidence and information, the Manchester attack was a carefully orchestrated, complex operation planned by various public sector agencies. I believe the alleged perpetrator was a controlled, intelligent asset who played his role for some weeks before the attack, before being caught on CCTV, gathering the materials for the device, etc. I do not believe he was killed in the attack. After fleeing the scene, he drove off in a grey Audi. I believe a number of members of the public, arena staff, and a small number of the emergency services were recruited to take part in a mock terrorist attack, which was reported as a real attack in the media. If you compare the blast scene at Manchester to the 1998 Omaha bombing, there really is no comparison. I've not seen any photos of the scene at Manchester showing any serious injury or death. No one took a photo showing an open flesh wound with someone's bones sticking out. But if you compare Manchester with the Nell bombing in London Soho in 1999, you have photographs of clear flesh wound injuries, multiple photos at a time when mobile phones with cameras were not available. You don't have any of that with Manchester. Why people can't put two and two together and ask, hang on, where are the images? There are images of the injured, but none of those are in the arena and none of them are at the scene, nor are there any images of dead people. I was stuck in traffic behind a car accident years ago, and the traffic coming the other direction, every other car had their hands out taking pictures of the accident with their mobile phones. People tend to think we don't do that kind of thing, but we do. If a major incident happens, not everybody, but many people get their phones out and start taking pictures. People want evidence to show they've been involved in something, to show they were there. And it doesn't exist with Manchester. There's one still photo taken by Chris Parker in the foyer where the blast occurred. But that just shows people lying on the ground. It doesn't show evidence of injury or death. And people will say that the lack of evidence doesn't mean it didn't happen the way that they say it. But once you look at other things, such as first-hand witness statements, the official narrative falls apart. I sometimes show the Sun front page from 2010, featuring an image of PC David Rathband with his face blown off from a shotgun attack to illustrate this point. They want it both ways. They want to be able to show the public a police officer's face blown off, but they can't show a single image of injury or death at the Manchester incident. The argument for not showing the evidence is so flimsy because they could easily put an 18 warning on it or put them out in restricted manner. They have not done this because the images don't exist. And then he goes on to talk about the court case that is coming up against him. He says, I'm not actually being sued for defamation, but harassment and breach of GDPR rules, general data protection rules. And this is because he basically doxed several people, is my take on that. Anyway, this is not in-person harassment. They're saying that the opinions in my book amount to harassment. My barrister writes, the claims are denied and make very little reference or any reliance on any conduct or specific statements of opinion by the defendant made about either of the claimants. Instead, the claimants report to bring a claim of harassment, which is based almost entirely on general observations, other statements and opinions of the journalist about an alleged incident at Manchester Arena, and base most of their claim on what he believes to be untrue about the narrative which has been presented to the general public. In summary, they are seeking to bring a claim against the defendant for being an independent broadcaster who has advanced opinions which are different to the mainstream media, all under the guise of harassment against them personally. This amounts to censorship and is an abuse of process. The word opinion, and this is Richard now, the word opinion appears in my book over 100 times. There is a message at the front which makes it clear that I am only expressing my opinions. The intention of this legal action is to get an injunction against me and bankrupt me. And if that were to happen, it would have serious ramifications for my freedom of speech. So that concludes the case that Richard is putting forward. There are some things that are more plausible than others. Like as we've said, like the EXIF data is quite strong. Some of the leaps of speculation that he make are speculative to the point of offensiveness, particularly regards to accusing people of killing their kids and stuff like that. But that is case. If you take on board some of the things that Richard believes, you can totally understand why he thinks that. And if you've come to this position, you've gone basically, look, the EXIF data is accurate. And then I've got an expert in her field, this statement analyst. And this statement analyst is used all over the world by legitimate law enforcement agencies. Then these are both legitimate types of evidence. If you go down that route, then you can quite easily sort of understand where Richard might be coming from.
Yeah, I'd say, like, personally, from the beginning of what he's saying, it has more questions to it. You know, I think there's questions that need answering, like in the beginning, the sort of, you know, the Salman al-Baidi sort of questions.
Yeah, okay.
that sort of stuff. Yeah, I think there may be something to be asked. But as he keeps going on,
It becomes more and more tenuous, doesn't it?
yeah, it really does. It becomes a lot more of guessing.
Yes. It gets harder. It gets harder. Yeah.
I think he's done it backwards, and I can understand why he's done it backwards,
Okay.
because he thinks that these are two massive pieces of evidence. The EXIF data showing that it's been filmed in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and then the statement analyst. And those are the two pillars on which he's piled all the rest of his evidence up. And so he started from the position of, because of X and Y, we know that it didn't happen
Yeah.
in the way that it did. And so if it didn't happen that way, what is the explanation for it? And it's because he feels so strongly in those two bits of evidence, the statement analyst and the EXIF data, and also to a degree, the Audi car as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
He thinks that's very, very strong.
And that concludes part 4. Thank you for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy, the Manchester Arena bombing on trial series. Tune in next week for part 5. And as always, if you subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/somedarecallitconspiracy, you can listen to the full 8-part series right now. Thanks again.